So an appeals court in the United Kingdom overturned a decision by a lower court which blocked the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. That means that as of now, Assange is now on schedule again to be extradited to the U.S., where he will, at the very least, spend the rest of his life in prison, if not be executed. I know that the UK has a rule about not extraditing people who are going to face the death penalty, so the US is sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Oh, no, we won't execute him. We're not going to charge him with anything that carries the death penalty. But I would imagine that if they haven't dropped that already, because there's a lot of charges on him, there might already be one that carries the death penalty. But if not, there will be once he is brought to the United States, once he's passed the UK court system. So the lower court ruled that Assange basically is not in good mental health, and that he would not be properly cared for by the U.S. authorities, and that he would, face, grave harm, prior to a conviction. Because remember, in civilized countries, you're not supposed to mistreat your prisoners because they're presumed innocent until proven guilty. So you have to treat them like they are innocent. You can't punish them ahead of time. And of course, America says, oh, no, we would never do anything bad to him. We'd never suicide him. We'd never stop looking at the security cameras in his cell in the middle of the night. But the fight's not over yet. Assange can still appeal to the UK Supreme Court, which, if that sounds familiar, it should, because from what I understand, the UK Supreme Court is not something that's been around forever. I think it was actually based on the US Supreme Court, which is a little strange. Usually we talk about how, American law is rooted in English law, and how our system is derived from theirs, not how theirs is derived from ours. It's kind of strange. But in any case, I don't think, in the UK you don't have a guaranteed right to an appeal, so I don't know if Assange necessarily will have his appeal heard by the UK Supreme Court, but he can try and appeal it. And say what you will about the UK, they are better on these issues than the United States. So he has a better shot over there than once he comes here. It is almost universal in the UK that people abhor the death penalty and don't want to treat prisoners very harshly. It's a pretty soft on crime society. London, not a very safe place from what I understand. The UK is tough on thought crimes, which, Assange is a thought criminal, so I guess he has that going against him. And the UK is a country which is, their political establishment is particularly obsessed with Russia for some reason. And so all the accusations that, Assange is a Putin puppet, that might hurt him worse over there than it would here these days. But still, considering that at least one court did block the extradition, if he's granted this appeal in the Supreme Court, I do think that there's at least a chance, because it's a 50-50 thing when you look at the lower courts. So the Supreme Court can kind of look at that, and I don't think that it's impossible that they go one way or the other. Yes, the political pressure is going to weigh heavily in favor of extraditing him, getting him out of there, giving him to the American allies. But his chances are better at blocking this at having this extradition blocked than he has of getting a fair trial here in the U.S. He will not have a fair trial here. He won't even have a public trial. The persecution of Assange is not going to age well. This is going to be one of those things that, in a couple decades, kids will learn about in school as a terrible atrocity. Hopefully, I wouldn't like to think that we're still going to be this insane in a couple decades. I don't think we will be. But I think we're living in a time now that's similar to The early 20th century, when the Espionage Act, which Assange is being charged under, was passed, in which people were locked up for thought crime. You had Eugene Debs thrown in prison by Woodrow Wilson. Other anti-war journalists were, not that Eugene Debs was a journalist, but anti-war journalists back then were criminalized and censured, thrown in prison. During the Civil War, Lincoln, the great tyrant, threw journalists in prison. And so there have been many instances throughout U.S. history where opposing the war state and the military-industrial complex has been a crime. And unfortunately, we're living in one of those times now. So, the most prominent enemy of the war state is probably Assange, and that's why they're going after him. This is going to obviously have a chilling effect on anyone who publishes truly unfavorable leaks from the government. The message that's being sent here is that, hey, we'll happily leak to you journos at the New York Times and the Washington Post and wherever all sorts of scoops that make us look good. But if you ever get a leak that makes us look bad, we're going to put you away for the rest of your life at the very least, if not have you executed. And this really started under Obama and continued under Trump, and I think it shows no sign of letting up under Biden. The use of the Espionage Act, this old relic, bringing it out of the shadows, dusting it off, and using it to persecute journalists who publish things that make the government and the wars look bad. Assange's crime, explicitly, is that he exposed that the U.S. military murdered civilians in Iraq and then covered it up and didn't even tell their families. We are told that, oh my gosh, it greatly endangered, American security and blah, 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 blah. What they mean by that is it made us look bad. And for that, Assange loses his life. Because, life in prison is a strange euphemism. Because life in prison is a death sentence. It's just a death sentence by a different time. They're sentencing you to die of old age rather than by lethal injection or the electric chair. In some ways, maybe it's more barbaric, life in prison, or, death. It's really death by prison. And even if this eventually gets wrapped up in Assange's favor, it's not like he will have been able to get off without punishment. This whole process, even if he's able to escape the death penalty, he's been punished by the process. The process is the punishment. Just like, with Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse lost a year of his life. Assange has lost, I don't know how many years of his life at this point. It's been the better part of a decade, certainly. And that whole time, he's really been in a prison. In the time that he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, he lived in a room. And since he was arrested, he's lived in a cell. It's amazing to me that Assange has been able to actually hold up this entire time. From what we're hearing, he's not in a good mental state, hasn't been for a long time. But, if I were in his position, I think I would off myself a very, very long time ago. Probably after the election in Ecuador, when that very, what do you want to call him, pro-NATO, pro-US, pro-IMF, that tool was elected in Ecuador, who stripped Assange of his citizenship and handed him over to the United Kingdom. When that happened, I think I would have wanted to die a free man. Well, freer than someone who has been sentenced and convicted. I don't know how you go through all this. At the end of it, your odds of winning are so slim. I don't have a problem saying it. I'm a lot weaker than that. It couldn't have been that hard. As many years as Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy, he could have befriended a guard or or I guess we wouldn't call him a guard, but, somebody in that embassy who was armed. And if they were your friend, and you asked them nicely, I'm sure they'd pass you your gun. And then it'd all be over, and everyone could go home. But Assange didn't do that. He hasn't done that. He's still fighting, which is beyond admirable. You know, if there's one guy who could have turned this whole story around and gave it a happy ending, it would have been Donald Trump. He even offered to pardon Assange. He sent Dana Rohrabacher over to the Ecuadorian embassy in London many years ago now to offer him that, if only he would reveal the name of his source for the emails, for the DNC emails, or Hillary's emails, or Podesta's emails. I can't remember which one it was. And Assange had the integrity. You know, Assange, he could have said, here's my source. And then even if that, ruined his reputation as a journalist, he could have gone, if he was pardoned, he could have gone and just lived a normal life. He could have gone home. Of course, I guess he would have been going home to an Australia that within a couple of years turned into a prison. But I still would have chosen that if I were Assange over what he did. I mean, he could have even lied if he wanted to. But he cared so much about his own integrity that he chose to condemn himself really to death. Because Trump, while a lot of us may have wanted Trump to have pardoned Assange, on his way out of office, to me, I think the idea of pardoning people, by the way, at the end of your term is just ridiculously cowardly. If there are people who deserve to be pardoned, who don't deserve to be in prison, or who don't deserve to have that on their record, you should do it on your first day, not your last day in office. Because either that means that this is somebody who shouldn't be pardoned, who you're doing, you're pardoning them as a favor and it's embarrassing for you, in which case you shouldn't be pardoning them, or you made an innocent person rot for 4 years waiting for your pardon. And so Assange is one of those cases. He should have been pardoned by Trump as soon as he got into office, and at the very least you should have pardoned him on his last day. The press for Trump could not have been worse than it was on his last day. Nobody would have even noticed if he had pardoned Assange, except for, all the people who would have been happy about it. So it's important to remember that Trump is a villain in all this. If he was willing to pardon Assange, he knows that he's innocent, and he withheld that pardon because he wanted to make a deal with Assange. He wanted to negotiate Assange's freedom in exchange for scoring a few political points. So, with that said, I wish I had better news, but maybe there will be tomorrow.